Alicia very kindly stepping in to watch PMQs so we don't have to. Now, there are two obvious topics for Kemi Badenoch to ask her 6 questions on of the Prime Minister. Southport, massively in the news, dominating all the front pages for days after that guilty plea from Max Rudabakana. Also, the economy. Huge big issue. Davos, World Economic Forum's happening right now. Rachel Reeves is there right now. We've had some really dire economic figures and things are not looking good. So which of those did she talk about?
Well, absolutely none of them. And it seems to be a bit of a repeated theme with Kemi Badenoch at PMQs. This isn't the first time where everyone said, well, she'll definitely go in on this. There's been a huge story in the news that is kind of an easy win for the Conservatives, and she's not mentioned it at all. Instead, today, she used all 6 questions to talk about the Education and Schools Bill, which is kind of slightly old news as well. This was only really came up when that debate about the grooming gang scandal arose. That's really the only time it's been in the news, and that was a couple of weeks ago. And it's not. And
that was when the Tories tried to add on an inquiry.
And the actual bill itself has not been something that's been hugely controversial. It's not been making massive headlines.
Although the Tories are opposed to it. A lot of it's undoing the academies, independence and things like that. But absolutely not on the news agenda.
No, absolutely not. And it's not to say that it's not valid. However, when there are so many other things, as the topics that you just mentioned, Southport, the economy, so many easy wins for the Conservatives now, it was really quite surprising that she chose to focus on.
Well, should we have a watch and listen of what she did ask?
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister thinks that he can distract people from what is wrong with this bill. This is not about breakfast clubs and school uniforms. Teachers and parents will be horrified at just how bad this bill is. Even his own MPs may not realise it, but the bill will cut teachers' pay. It cuts pay for 20,000 teachers. His Education Secretary says there is not a ceiling for pay. They're all shaking their heads. They clearly haven't read the bill. She hasn't read the bill either.
Mr. Speaker, we do need flexibility in our schools. And if she'd hopped off social media for a while, she would have seen the amendment that was put down this morning to achieve that end. But she says this bill is not about child protection. We had a young child killed who was taken out of a school by an abuser. This bill closes that gap.
Now, this, of course, is little Sarah Sharif, isn't it? Here's the thing. I mean, I can understand the point of wanting to wrong-foot the Prime Minister a little bit. Like, he'll have prepped on Southport, he'll have prepped on the economy, you know, ready to go, and therefore you go on something completely different, then, you know, you kind of wrong-foot a little bit. But it feels very off-agenda. I'm looking on social media, not that we should be judging everything by that. An awful lot of people are saying, well, hold on a minute, you know, talk about a uni party, you're not discussing this. But we know that the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philps, has been talking an awful lot about this. We also know Reform MPs have been talking an awful lot about this issue of what's been going on in Southport. Indeed, Kemi Badenoch herself. But that's a weird choice. Yeah, absolutely. And even worse is the point that she made in that clip, and that's the one that seems to be the kind of top line from their exchange. She was saying that teachers' pay will be cut in this bill, but what she didn't actually realise and wasn't up to date with, which I think is what Keir Starmer was saying with the whole get off social media and you might realise, is that Labour have actually added an amendment to that bill to make sure that teachers' pay isn't cut, and that happened today. So she was basically attacking him for something that has already been changed. Has been changed, and she obviously just that totally passed her by. So this idea of trying to catch him off guard. Well, crucially, her advisors. I mean, some of them should be sitting there. Again, this comes down to does PMQs really matter? But she hasn't set the world alight as Tory leader so far. And I'm a big fan of Kemi Badenoch. I think she stood for a lot of really key issues. But she hasn't set the world alight. She hasn't got massive support. A lot of Tory members are not being very impressed so far with her leadership so far. And, you know, where are the policies? Where, you know, is something more hard-hitting? This is going to make a lot of, not just MPs, there aren't that many Tory MPs, but a lot of Tory members just go, well, hold on a minute, like what, and voters. What are you talking about here? Yeah, and I think the issue is it's not the first time. I mean, she's not been leader very long, and I can probably remember 2 other situations where
it just seems like it's not hit the mark. It just seems like there have been such obvious wins for them, and it's just been avoided. And no one really seems to know what the reason is for this. Is it she's getting poor advice from people? Is it she's playing it too safe? We don't really know, but it seems to happen quite a lot. And I think people just want to see her kind of score those easy wins.
I mean, and again, Claire Pearce, I don't want point scoring over kids dying in Parliament, but there are points to be made. Is there always that problem though with Kemi Badenoch or any Tory leader, whoever it is? Unless they were like brand newly elected in July and never, no one had ever heard of them before, that basically whatever you say, whatever criticism you make of the Labour government, any policy and anything they do, it's you were in charge for 14 years and you did nothing.
But you should be able to then put that back to them and say, you can't answer the question, you're Prime Minister now. You can give that back in spades. And unfortunately, I think both of them just aren't very good at that off-the-cuff, knockabout PMQs that we're always used to.
Yeah, and again, which some Prime Ministers and opposition leaders are much better at than others. Although, again, William Hague was great at that as an opposition leader, and I don't remember him ever being Prime Minister. So, there's a point worth making. Let's go to another question. Obviously, Lib Dems, more MPs now, so Davey gets to stand up and
you look delighted about that.
He's so excited. He used to go to the SNP. I'd say, I've always thought, Stephen Flynn's superb. I mean, some of he's skewered, absolutely skewered, the various Tory leaders who he came across. But Ed Davey asked for something rather more topical.
He did, yes. And do you know what? Fair play to him. At least he kind of hit the mark and hit the news agenda this week. He basically asked Keir Starmer in a very kind of short, albeit maybe lacking in a little bit of detailed question, whether the UK would just sell out to Trump, and Keir Starmer just kind of looked a bit annoyed and said, absolutely, they won't do that, and sat down, and that was the end of it.
Well, let's have a watch and a listen of that.
Mr. Speaker, turning now to the United States, can the Prime Minister guarantee that he will not sell out Britain's fantastic farmers to Donald Trump in a trade deal that undermines our high food and animal welfare standards in the way that the Conservatives sold them out in the Australia and New Zealand deals?
Mr. Speaker, we will work with the US, we will work with other countries, but we will never lower our standards.
I mean, just... I personally think that one question was better than the entirety of the exchange between Kemi Badenoch and Keir Starmer. I mean, it's relevant, it's important.
It's one of the biggest issues affecting the country right now, and especially, of course, with Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor over in Davos. Not that many people really, turns out, very interested in Davos, the great and the good and the powerful and the rich there. Not really interested in hearing what Rachel from Accounts thinks. But Donald Trump's going to be over there, I think, tomorrow, speaking later in the afternoon. That might be quite good fun. See what he has to say there. But I mean, is your genuine impression that Keir Starmer there is sort of on the back foot, or is he? I mean, because his statement in that address to the nation yesterday morning on Southport, I mean, certainly didn't convince our audience. That's for sure. People feel there's a lot of anger. There's a lot of feeling that that they don't feel, when you look at the grooming gangs issue and all these other issues, that they're just, when you look at the economic issues and not turning the tide on any of the major issues in this country, that things just aren't going very well.
Yeah, I think that is sadly a fair assessment, and I mean sadly for the sake of the country. I think everyone's really fed up. I mean, we had the Conservatives, people saying we need a change, we need this change to happen now, we need it to happen quickly, and I think people's patience is a lot thinner than maybe it would be given the kind of context that we've had over the past few years. People just want things to improve, they want their life to be easier, and they're not seeing it at the moment. I know that things don't just happen overnight, it's not magic. I wish it could be, but it's not.
But I think a lot of people are definitely not even heading in the right direction. It's interesting, the polling shows even Labour people are saying this.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting. It's the amount of people who voted Labour really enthusiastically at the election, which was only, 6 months ago?
Well, no more than voted Labour in 2019. I mean, this wasn't, Tony Blair style...
It wasn't, but...
97 stuff.
It wasn't, but they won, right? And there were people who felt really enthusiastic, really hopeful, and thought that this was the time that things would finally change. And now...
How's that working out for
Some of those people are just saying, oh, where do we go? Where do we go? We tried the Conservatives, we've tried Labour, what is the alternative?
And again, that is the interesting thing, when you do see people like Donald Trump coming through. Yes, now he's basically completely got control of the Republican Party, but was seen very much as an upstart in 2016. A lot of people said, we couldn't do it again. And then we see what's going on in Europe as well. So many of those parties on the right often decry outsiders, far right, pushing policies which would have been mainstream 10 years ago. It is really interesting to see. I mean, it's going to be a rip-roaring 4 years to watch in America. I think it's going to be a bit of a duller time for us here in the UK. But I think that I certainly get the feeling that there are changes afoot.
In what sense?
In our political, we've got a first past the post system, but there is just a feeling that people simply are going, this just isn't going to be good enough anymore.
Yeah, I think that's really true, and I think people are more willing to take a chance on smaller parties for that reason, whether it's Reform, whether it's the Greens, whether it's the independent MPs, whoever it may be. People are more open to taking that risk.
I mean, you are taking a chance with the Greens, just saying. I mean, if you want to have your, no electricity and not ever go on holiday again and not have a car, go for it.
You're taking a chance with all of them, effectively. I mean, I know that, you can more easily argue it's less of a risk with Reform, but we have to remember that Nigel Farage has not been an MP before. We don't have an awful lot to really look at evidence and prove that.
I mean, that's the funny thing is, I mean, I've known him for a very long time. I remember interviewing him about 20 years ago. Like, what was the first thing you'd do on day one if you won? I'd go to the pub. Yeah, that's not going to fly this time around. Although, Donald Trump would get away with that sort of thing if he was a drinker. Alicia Fitzgerald, so appreciate you joining us, political correspondent who watched PMQs. I've had a little note from Peter Cardwell. He is very unwell. We send our love to you, my darling. We do so much. Still manfully. Anyway, 12:45 is the time. Up next, we're going to be talking about how we're going to deal with benefit cheats. Oh, it's really, really simple. We're going to ban them from driving legally. I mean, if you took their cars, then maybe they couldn't drive, but we'll see how well that will work out.